Alright, so I think it's time to finally update my 1v1 arena tier list. I think it's as good of a time as any. Well, maybe a better time would have been to wait for the first balance patch for the new civs and the new expansion. But if that happens, I'll just adjust it accordingly. Right, so with the Dawn of the Dukes, we've been introduced to two more civilizations. We have Poles and we have Bohemians, and a few balance changes for other civs along the way. So let's just start fresh and put the list together. So S tier, just what I consider the best civs. I think at the moment currently, and I think many arena players would agree, is the fact that Bohemians, the new kid on the block, with the Dawn of the Dukes, is definitely number one, or at the very least, like top 3 arena civilization at the moment. And for me, I'm going to put them as number 1. You have a pretty scary, unique unit that also doesn't cost food, so it can really lend itself well to some really YOLO aggression. You also have arguably the best monk rush in the game, or again, like probably or at the very worst, like second worst, or second best. I mean, maybe after Aztecs. And just to have a really nice late game with the Hussite wagons, which are really tanky. And really, I think for most civs, the only real counter to them is like the onager line. But that's what the upgraded bombard cannons of the civilization, the Haufnitze, are for. They can just absolutely wreck onagers. They can very easily one-shot siege onagers as well. So yeah, just overall a very strong, really nice civ. Second is Turks. It was a really tough pick for me between Bohemians and Turks as far as the number 1 arena civ. I think I'm going to order them this way, although they're very, very close, I'd say. For a lot of the same reasons, Turks, I think, as scary of a late game. I think maybe an equally scary late game, just that gunpowder focus. But unlike Bohemians, I think Turks can definitely take the more like a mobility approach with the easy to upgrade Hussars and the very tanky HCA. And then you have the long-range bombard cannons, bombard towers to kind of support those. So you're really scary late-game civilization. But of course, you also have the mid-game Janissary aggression that can never be underestimated when you're fighting Turks. Janissary plus siege push just kills so many different civilizations on arena, and just like a full YOLO 1TC push from Turks can just be absolutely terrifying to deal with. So yeah, a lot of stuff going for them. Number 3, I think, is going to be Byzantines. I think some people might disagree. A lot of people might disagree with putting them that high, but I still do think Byzantines are rightfully in S tier. You got the cheap trash, you got the cheap Imperial Age, which can give you a really strong early Imperial Age timing. You got the cataphracts, which combined with the cheap Byzantine trash can just be so obnoxious to deal with. And the only civs that really have a shot at dealing with it are civs that have really strong, like double gold unit compositions, usually involving either some kind of very strong ranged or melee unit backed up with some kind of siege. But it's really expensive to get to for most civilizations, and Byzantines can and even pressure out a lot of those civilizations with just the cheaper imp and just stronger early Imperial Age imp timing, just the imp timing for everything. So yeah, overall, very strong civ. Oh yeah, very good monks as well. You got bombard cannon axes as well. So those two are very nice perks in an arena civ. Fourth, I think, is Teutons. Definitely fallen from grace a little bit, but I still think they definitely have a rightful place in S tier. I'd say maybe aside from like I think Bohemians and Turks, I think maybe outpacing Teutons, and I think also having a pretty reasonable matchup against Teutons and some themselves. I think what's making me hesitant to put Teutons in like the number 2 or number 1 spot is, especially off the back of Masters of Arena 6, I think some more emphasis has been placed on the early Imperial Age stage of the game, and that's the period of time usually when Teutons are the weakest. Like they're pretty strong in like the dark feudal or like castle age and like where they're booming, but because their late game is pretty expensive, and they don't really have much in the way of like a really solid early Imperial Age opening, except maybe like their Cavaliers that can make for a good Imperial Age that can make for a decent early Imperial Age opening, but it's typically not a type of opening you see a lot on Arena, and so usually you're kind of playing defensively as Teutons until you can get that late game up and running. And if you're facing a civ that can really punish you hard and really push hard in early Imperial Age, I think that's where Teutons can suffer. But still, you got a great economy, fantastic monks, fantastic late game, and there's really not a whole lot to complain about if you get Teutons on Arena. I still think they're definitely an S tier. I think Burgundians, can take number 5. The Flemish Revolution tech definitely received a nerf with the cost hike, but I still think it can still be a pretty obnoxious tech to deal with, especially if they're played in the style of it's just full eco, and then you're just working up to Flemish Revolution. You mass up some, then you probably open with some kind of counter army, whether it's like a Cavalier, which you can upgrade for pretty cheap, or like skirm opening if you're facing like an archer civ or something, and then you can go straight into Flemish Revolution and just completely ruin your opponent's day. Either that, or you can go like the cheap paladin route, mass up some of those, and if your opponent tries to go for like either like halb or maybe even camel defense, that's when maybe you can build up your eco a little bit stronger, and then you can hit Flemish Revolution just to like run them over that way. It's not as strong as it was before, because it's not as easy to do that as it was before because of the cost hike again on Flemish Revolution, but I still think, yeah, it definitely is possible. Aside from that, you got solid gunpowder access, you got bombard cannons that are capable of one-shotting generic siege onagers, beefed up hand cannoneers, although they do miss the last armor upgrade, so they're kind of like a glass cannon, like even more so of a glass cannon unit than, hand cannoneers typically are. And yeah, I think maybe what's holding Burgundians back is maybe that post-imp power. I think that's definitely when the civ kind of falls off, but until that point, I think the civ is definitely very strong, with good eco and like reasonable job able to hold in like early to mid Imperial Age. That was my door. If that came through the audio, not sure. I think afterwards might be Britons. There's a lot of Arena players that would put them as like probably like they were like number 1. I think with the coming of Bohemians, maybe they would be relegated to number 2. I don't know. I've just always found Britons to be a little bit overrated. It's a really fragile civilization regarding its army compositions, to the point where if you lose like one big engagement, like things can just snowball out of control for you very quickly. Now, some people might argue that could be the case for a lot of civilizations, but I don't think they'd be wrong. But I think it's just most noticeable with like a civ like Britons that just have like such a fragile army composition in the late game. Like none of their most commonly used units go above like 60 to 70 HP. So if you're losing a big fight with units that fragile, then yeah, it's just that much easier for things to snowball out of control for you, and for you to lose the game outright. So Britons, yeah, I just think they're a little overrated personally, but I won't deny I think it's one of those civs that might. I think as you climb up in elo, I think they're played better. But even at those levels, I think, if you're facing an opponent who's pushing you very hard, I think you could have a bit of a rough time as Britons. And watch out especially for those siege ram pushes. Like, don't just blindly open archers just because it's what your civ is good at, because that can definitely spell disaster for you if your opponent's just going full siege ram push. And I've killed many Britons players that way, just at my skill level. Probably more difficult to do with the higher ratings, but definitely still possible, and definitely something you definitely have to watch out for as Britons. I think the last civ in my S tier is going to be Malay. Again, another civ that I think is a little bit overrated. But that being said, they did get some nice buffs. Elephants are even cheaper. They have and the Karambit Warrior got buffed. So I think they have some more. They have a few more good matchups. But as usual, it's just they can struggle for resources in like early Castle Age, especially if you're doing some kind of map control strategy. You can really be feeling that lack of resources like early Castle Age that could stop you from either having some that. So even though you up to Castle Age with like more villagers, you might find that you have to delay stuff like some eco text or maybe some army number if you're taking map control, just because of that lack of resources at that point as you hit that. At that point as you hit Castle Age, but afterwards, like a few minutes into Castle Age, it's kind of smooth sailing from there. You got a really nice boom, really nice early Imperial Age timing. You don't really have a whole lot of power in post Imperial Age though. You have some decent siege. Your elephants are cheap, I guess. You can spam a lot of them, but still, I mean, they're statistically very weak. Yeah, I just don't think Malay have the most amount of power in the late game. That's, I think, where they can fall off. Although it is definitely compensated for a bit in post-Imperial Age, where you can get those forced levy two-handed swordsmen out. So if the game goes long enough, you can basically just win against almost any civilization in that trash war phase of the game. Still think they're definitely worthy in S tier. But yeah, I think just like Britons, I think they're a little bit overrated. Going on to A tier, civs that are, I think, just a cut below S tier. It's just something that holds them back, but otherwise they're very good civilizations. So first, I think, is Aztecs. I think Aztecs is a civ that I think has definitely fallen from grace, I think, harder than, like I said, for like Teutons. They fell from grace a little bit, but still in the same tier. But you have some like Aztecs who have fallen from grace, so I think a little bit harder, because I think they were S tier for a long time. I think it's, at this point in the game, at this point in the meta, I think it's pretty safe to put them in A tier. You have some insane monks. You have some strong military prowess with your faster military creation, but that was nerfed. Your economy bonus, I think, was effectively cut in half, if not more, especially for farmers. They took a pretty big hit. And so you have some really nice you have like a really strong like early Imperial Age, things like the eagles. You can push with arbalests as well, and that's all bolstered again by the faster military creation speed. Your relics generate extra gold, but I mean, I feel that in general, especially nowadays, I think people are a lot better prepared to deal with like almost every trick Aztecs have in the book. If you're trying to smush them, I think people, especially towards the higher levels, they definitely know how to deal with that better. Just like mass up a lot of armies, save up for heresy, and then basically your smush is dead. Or doing like an eagle push in like late Castle or early Imperial Age. I think people can also have figured out pretty well how to deal with that as well. Just so I just feel like Aztecs have. Yeah, it just feels like Aztecs are, I don't know, they're strong up until like a very certain part in the game, and then they just fall off a cliff. And especially that post-Imperial stage of the game where they don't really have the greatest options available to them. You have like siege onagers, that's probably like the most pop-efficient like thing they have going for them at that point, but I mean, you don't have halbs. Garland Wars pikemen are not a replacement for missing halberdiers in most situations, in my opinion. They're slower to take out cavalry that would come in to try and snipe those siege units. They're worse against paladins, and I think especially paladin civs are going to be like the death of Aztecs in post-Imperial Age because of that lack of halb. But otherwise, still a pretty good civ. I think they're still good enough to be an A tier, I feel. Portuguese, I think, is going to be second in my A tier. Portuguese, I think, have really come into their own in recent months in the arena meta, and I think their prowess as an arena civ, I think, was shown a lot in MOA 6, both in the qualifiers and in the main stage. What's really irritating about Portuguese, like facing them anyways, is the fact that they just break all the rules regarding like the military and economy dynamics, where let's say you're going like full 1TC YOLO aggro. By nature, that means you're going to be very focused on the military production. Like, let's say you're going organ guns, for example, with Portuguese, like, your eco would be shot because you're going 1TC YOLO. But Portuguese turned that idea on its head. Like, they can go full YOLO, they can up to Imperial Age, and like the standard like fast stimp like 1 TC YOLO time, but they can change that, and they can turn that very easily into a full eco play because of Fetorias, and they were used religiously in MOA 6. And they're even something that I've been kind of experimenting with as well. This strategy with Portuguese has helped me beat players like they were like 150, 200 elo higher than me, just because it's just so difficult to deal with. So, yeah, Portuguese, yeah, they can be very, very annoying to play against, just because, you know, those typical rules, like you focus on eco, then you're neglecting military. And if you're focusing on military, you're neglecting eco. They just turn those dynamics, like those dynamics practically don't like apply to them. And yeah, it's for that. And otherwise, you know, they have solid monks, nice late game. Those Arquebus, BBC, and HC can be pretty difficult to deal with, especially, and they're like the Bombard cannons especially like a godsend against those heavy siege civs. I think Portuguese definitely deserve a spot in A tier for that reason. I think third is going to be Ethiopians. They're just a nice, consistent civilization with a really streamlined game plan. Halbs, archers, and siege, and that army composition can kill so many things in the game. You also have a reasonably good economy with those 400 extra resources that you get from advancing between feudal and castle age, and it can kickstart a really nice boom. Not top tier, I would say, but still like a pretty solid boom, all things considered. Your early imp opening with like the faster firing Arbalest and BBC can be very nice. Or like if you're facing a cavalry civ, like your halbs can be easily teched into because you already get pikemen for free. You can push like trebs alongside them, or even rams alongside them to deal with those. So it's just a nice overall, very nice flex, like a civilization that can be well, yeah, I was going to say flexible, but yeah, I'd say streamlined in the sense that their army composition, like their best army composition that they can go for, is pretty streamlined. But like they're flexible in the sense that either of like those really good early Imperial Age openings can work very well for Ethiopians. So I think they can work very well there. I think Italians might be next. It's another civ that I think has really proven itself throughout MOA 6. And I think even on regular arena, I think they have definitely come into their own. Solid monks, solid smush potential with that cheap age up bonus. Similar in concept with the Byzantines in the sense that you can get to the ages quicker, but Italians kind of stretch it further, like earlier in the game, because they can advance to feudal and castle age for cheap, not just imperial age. Your late game it's pretty solid as well. You got cheap BBC, you got the Genoese crossbowmen, and the Genoese crossbowmen in combination with bombard cannons and hussars that can be very difficult to stop with. That can be so difficult to stop for a variety of civilizations. I think really the only civs that I think have a shot versus that are like the Halb and siege civs, and even then I think it can get kind of tricky. I think the Halb and siege civs that I think also have bombard cannons, and hopefully that those bombard cannons preferably should have siege engineers as well, because that's something Italians don't have. I think those are the ones that can probably deal with Italians well. But otherwise, you know, there are other, like most everyone else, I think is going to struggle. So yeah, very, very good civ that has really come into its own. Afterwards, I think you can probably pick Saracens. I think that's going to be my next pick. That market bonus, I think, can kickstart either a really nice boom, can get you to Imperial Age pretty quickly, and it can even open up the possibility for you to do more low eco stuff, like 1 or 2 TC stuff, get a really nice like Imperial Age timing, and you can just push hard, abusing that market. Players like Tato, for example, I think swear by Saracens, and you know their gameplay with Saracens on Arena definitely shows that. Where I guess the only thing that really holds them back is the fact that without the market bonus, you have a pretty generic eco otherwise, and so you're really incentivized to use it for whatever it is that you're doing. So I think maybe that's the one thing that holds them back. But yeah, I think with smart use of the market, I think you can probably even they could even jump up to S tier. It just depends on skill of the player and like how comfortable they are operating Saracens. So I think, but I think they're definitely have a rightful place in A tier. Also with that really nice wide tech tree for the late game as well. So they can typically counter most things. I think they're really only struggling against like raw power, like full halb and like siege and stuff, and or even like a lot of like maybe like cavalry plus like halberdiers. That can be a little tricky for Saracens to fight because they don't get halb themselves, and their camels might be struggling a bit against the halbs in particular. But then again, they still do have like the good ranged unit options to be able to support their own camels, so they can definitely still play it in those matchups fine. I think Franks is going to be next. Really solid economy, really dangerous map control potential, and like if you let Franks get map control and they like park two of their cheap castles in your face, that could be very difficult to come back from. Like they will always have the advantage in Treb wars against like almost every civilization in the game after that point, and you can just get your base completely destroyed as a result of that. And otherwise, you have the best paladins, like especially after the Lithuanians, like missing Blast Furnace. I'll be getting to them, obviously. I think they have probably the best overall paladins in the game. Much easier to get to, because you don't have to rely on relics like Lithuanians would have to. And plus, you have a better economy. Got some good supporting units: the throwing axeman, the hand cannoneer. You have the bombard cannons that have siege engineers. So yeah, overall a nice civ. I think what's holding them back, I think, is if you don't have that map control, I think Franks can struggle more because they don't have the greatest of early Imperial Age options. For instance, their archer line is pretty bad. Archers and skirms are pretty bad. Your only like decent early Imperial Age opening, I think, would be like halbs, and that doesn't work against a lot of different civs. And so you might be a sitting duck, especially against like the strong archer civs, until you can get like those mass paladins up and running. And then at that point, you can probably take the fight to them. And but until that point, I think Franks might be struggling a little bit. But still, really, they still have more than enough going for them to be an A tier. I was a little hesitant about where to play. I was a little hesitant on where exactly I should place Poles, but I think I'm probably going to put them in low A tier for now. Oh man, those Slacha privilege cavaliers that cost only 30 gold. Like you can just spam so much of them off the back of like a 3 or 4 TC, like a good 3 TC boom that, like it can even overrun their counters if you're not careful. So yeah, it can. Like in the Mini Clowns tournament, I saw someone running over like mass Genoese crossbowmen with the sheer number of cavalier spam that the Poles can unleash. I got run over with like just all those cavaliers even though I opened halbs. Although part of it was me just not being able to manage the fight on multiple fronts because I was being raided to death. But even still, like he was matching my halb numbers with cavaliers pretty much. And yeah, if that happens, then your halbs are always going to lose. If they follow up with siege or something, then yeah, you're basically dead. You have there. Otherwise, they have a really solid economy with the folwarks that can boost your farmers' efficiency a lot. You do have Arbalest and BBC, which can make for a decent early Imperial Age opening off the back of that strong eco. Of course, the Arbs are missing the last armor upgrade. Their siege engineer, so you can hit a bit of a brick wall with that opening, but you also have those cheap cavalier that can just overwhelm even their counters, and also the Obok unique unit, which is I think a disgustingly cost efficient unit right now. Yeah, I think their stats are just way too good for their cost. But I mean, considering all those bonuses, I think that's what's making Poles sit at the top. I think near the top anyways. I think probably I'd say maybe their biggest weakness might be to like CA and like CA units. Like if you go like some kind of CA unit plus like halberdiers, I think that could be a pretty solid counter to Poles. But still, you need to be careful with how you open versus the civ. Yeah, they're very much, you can say maybe in many ways they're like the Goths of cavalry, where it's like statistically they're kind of crap, but they can spam so many of them that oftentimes it doesn't matter. But of course, unlike Goths, they have a very good economy and they have some other really solid options that they can go for. So I think I'll just keep them in A tier. Sicilians, I think, will be last in A tier. The Civ I begrudgingly put in A tier as well, because... And that's because of their new unique technology that they got, Hauberk. It's a ridiculously cheap technology that boosts the hell out of their cavaliers. And so you're looking at a pretty monstrous unit, especially for 1v1 with the Sicilian cavaliers. They have 6 melee armor and 8 pierce armor, and they take half damage from halberdiers. So, yeah, and of camels as well. So, yeah, they can be so tough to stop. And I think, you know, and otherwise they have those other strong options like the Saracens, which I think are easier than your typical unique unit to tech into because of the access to, both because of like the faster built castles from Sicilians, and also the donjons, which you can spam to increase sergeant production as well. And yeah, of course, First Crusade in there as well too. That can give you a big boost in the sergeant numbers. And of course, you have siege onagers. I'd say really the only thing that, yeah, at this point with Hauberk being a thing, it could probably even be in like S tier just because of like the sheer power that they have. But I think the one thing I think that's probably keeping Sicilians in check power-wise is the fact that their eco is pretty, well, it's pretty, I'd say it's solid from like mid to like late Castle Age onwards, but up until that point, I think you're going to be dealing with what's otherwise a pretty generic economy, because their main eco bonus is those farm upgrades, you know, just being like twice as effective. And you don't really feel the effect of those better farm techs until at least like mid castle to like late Castle Age. And that's why I think that's like the one thing keeping them in check. The faster built TCs I think can maybe give them a slight vil boost compared to another Civ, but yeah, it's overall I wouldn't say it's super significant. So moving on to B tier after that. These are solid civs overall, but you definitely, if all these other civilizations are available, I'd say you probably wouldn't be picking these civs, with maybe a couple exceptions in there. So I think first on the list, I think is going to be Incas. Fallen from A tier, I think the thing about Incas is towards like the more middle to like high intermediate skill levels, I think this civ is probably like A tier. And then as you go higher up in skill level, I think the civ definitely starts dropping lower and lower to like maybe low B tier, maybe in C tier, possibly even D tier. I know Draken recently in his own tier list, he put Incas in D tier, which I think is pretty harsh. But if he's looking at it from the perspective of someone who's from like a player, like an arena player of his caliber, I think I can understand why. But for like, I think more typical players, I think Incas are very solid, mostly because most people at like the intermediate to high intermediate skill bracket, and even like some of the lower level experts like the 2Ks and stuff, I think they don't bother grabbing either heresy or faith. And that can be a very important technology to grab against Incas, because their best counter to siege, especially in late game, is monks. And without researching either faith or heresy, you're just going to get your siege converted out from under you, and your army is going to take a huge amount of damage potentially from those monks. So you have, of course, on top of the good monks, you have your Kamayuk unique unit. It can just destroy so many things in melee combat. And you got the slingers that can deal with a lot of different infantry civilizations, like a slinger plus monk opening, especially in like early Imperial Age, I think can be really problematic for like the infantry siege civs to deal with. Many of the different infantry siege civs to deal with, because you know you're trying to tech the siege, you're trying to tech the infantry, and then trying to fit in either faith or heresy in there at the same time. It's almost impossible. Like unless you've boomed on like 4 or 5 town centers, like that's basically impossible to do. So there's a big window of opportunity for Incas to put a lot of pressure on those civs. And just in general, one of the reasons why I put Incas like a lot higher than I think others would is just it's a civ that's helped me beat just better players just consistently, you know, time and time again. Just their ability to counter things, most things in the game, I think is almost unmatched. I think you'd have to go for like a civ like Byzantines, for example, who can probably match them for as far as like, you know, just the counter play is going. But whereas Byzantines can do the counter play with like just their cheap like counter units, I think Incas can play the counter game as a result of their more expensive, like the more gold intensive but more population efficient counters. I think put Burmese next. Late game is not bad, but typically it's not a situation you'd want to be in with Burmese as versus a lot of different civs. I think what puts them, what makes them so dangerous on Arena, I think, is their YOLO 1TC, like low eco pushes. Usually, like one of the best smushes in the game, alongside like Aztecs and Bohemians, probably like easily a top 3 smush in the game. I'd say their aggressive potential definitely was cut down a little bit as a result of the Arambai getting nerfed a little bit. They're still very good against units, but definitely nowhere near as good against buildings that they used to be, which is, I think, how the unit ought to be. But it's definitely fair to say, with that, the Arambai tweaking, so went a bit of Burmese's 1TC pushing power. But still, like their monks play, whether it's like a Castle Age monk rush or fast stint monks, is still very nice. Their elephants, like the Howdah unique technology, did get buffed. Elephants are pretty expensive to go for, and they've been nerfed consistently since DE's release, but still, it can be a really nice late game option to go for if you do find yourself at that point in the game. Solid infantry, like the +7 attack halbs, are nothing to sneeze at. You get your bomber cannons and your onagers, your trebs all get siege engineers, so you can still make things work with Burmese. Just try to steer clear of like the superpower archer civilizations. That's where Burmese can definitely start struggling. I think Lithuanians is going to be up next. So, how far they've fallen. Some of my tier lists having them in an S tier. I think they have a rightful place in B tier now because I think they were hit very hard with losing Blast Furnace. That hurts their paladins especially because before you could get +4 extra attack over a generic civilization's paladins, but yeah, you're gonna be lucky to get even like you're gonna be lucky to get 2 attack over a generic paladin, and that's assuming you get 4 relics, which is in like an evenly matched game. If both players are going map control, I think that can be pretty difficult to pull off. And so, as compensation, their lightest unique unit was given extra attack. Of course, lightest have their own downsides. You know, lower pierce armor, lower HP than the paladins. They're more vulnerable to archers, like just ranged units in general. But you still do have those tower shield skirms that you can use as support. Maybe in that sense, they could be similar to like the Byzantine cataphracts, where by themselves they might be vulnerable to like strong ranged units, but with like your boosted skirms, Byzantines having cheap skirms, Lithuanians having statistically better skirms, you can probably still make it work. But unlike Byzantines, I don't think Lithuanians have anywhere near the kind of like a early Imperial Age presence that Byzantines have. You don't get Arbalest, you have like no bonus really that helps you get to Imperial Age faster. And so I think you're going to be somewhat weak in early Imperial Age, and if you're being pushed by some early Imperial Age powerhouse like Byzantines, maybe like Malay, possibly Ethiopians and Italians as well, then I think you're going to be really suffering with Lithuanians, and you're going to find it really hard to get that late game online. I think Koreans I put as next to my B tier. Similar to Burmese, I think they're known for more like low eco plays, like Trush into Fast Stimp, or like war wagons, either like from single castle or double castle. But I think unlike Burmese, I think Koreans can probably hold themselves a little bit better in like a early Imperial Age and like even in post-Imperial Age, because I think they just have better units. They have ARBs, and like their archery range in general, I think is much better than Burmese. Their siege is, I think, a bit better than Burmese overall. You trade heavy Scorpion, but in return you get siege onagers, like some of the best siege onagers in the game. Of course, you need to spend a lot of resources to be able to tech into that. And above anything else, I'd say just where Koreans are struggling is just the lack of a good eco bonus. Just great units in late game, but just struggling to get there as a result of that lack of eco bonus, which is, I think, part of the reason why Koreans tend to be played in like a YOLO fashion. But still, considering like how dangerous their low eco stuff can be and how powerful their post-stim can be, I think that's more than enough to put them in B tier. And they're not, especially after they got the archer armor, like free archer armor upgrades bonus. I don't think they're especially like slow and vulnerable in early Imperial Age anymore. Like eco-wise, they might still be, but I still think militarily, I think they might still be able to keep up with like a civs and like a full, like assuming both sides are going like a full range, like a full archer, like a ranged unit fight. I still think Koreans can definitely match them pretty nicely. Vietnamese is next. Viper's favorite arena civilization. Actually, that was like months ago. I'm not sure if that's still the case. I know in his top 5 arena civs list, he put Vietnamese. Like at the end, he showed the rest of his tier list, and he put like Vietnamese at the top of A tier. I don't think they deserve a place that high personally. Vietnamese, they have a solid eco, but it's not top tier. Solid early Imperial Age and post-Imperial Age, but again, not top tier. The main issue, especially like with their economy, this is something I noted with when I was like casting some of the Clowns Got Talent mini clown sets, is that even though Vietnamese have like a solid like wood bonus with the ecotechs not having to cost wood, just the timing in which you get those wood savings, I think it's very wonky, because at the start, like I said, I believe the most impactful wood savings is like the 225 or so you get from getting double bit axe, horse collar, and bow saw, because those are like the absolute fundamental ecotechs that I think any civilization would want to get when they're booming in mid game. So realistically, that's like the main wood savings that Vietnamese get. So that can kickstart a nice boom for sure. But it's just as the Castle Age goes on and as your boom goes on, as you're slamming down more farms, as you're placing more villagers to wood, all of a sudden those extra wood savings that you get from those other ecotechs, like let's say, heavy plow, gold mining, wheelbarrow, and handcart, all those wood savings are nowhere near as impactful as the 225 savings at the start of Castle Age, because your wood income is already massive at that point in the game when you're grabbing most of those other ecotechs. And so that bonus, that their eco bonus, I think, is overall not as impactful as I think a lot of people might give them credit for. But still is a solid eco overall. Solid early Imperial Age opening. Like rattan archers can also make for a really scary late game, especially if you're fighting other archer civs, and like you have your really tanky battle elephants that can support them. Very expensive to get to, but we have seen that happen. I think Doubt had made that happen in his show match against Madri. Like it was Arbalest plus Battle Elephant, so a little bit easier on the eco, but still pretty expensive. Double unit gold army composition. But yeah, it can still happen. And Vietnamese, very solid, but I just wouldn't put them any higher than B tier, especially because they're kind of vulnerable to like those strong halb siege army compositions. You might argue like bombard cannons, Vietnamese having bombard cannons might help them out versus that, but still, when you're facing enough siege, and like you have halb support, and like they're all being like your opponent's just charging you all at once with like onagers, halbs, and like rams. There's only so much like that bombard cannon micro can do for you at that point. So yeah, overall I'd say Vietnamese, yeah, no higher than B tier. I think Japanese will be next. So unlike Vietnamese, Japanese I don't think have quite as good of a late game, although they can still make it work, because I think like Vietnamese I think have like the more pop efficient late game. I think Japanese have the more cost efficient late game. The cheap trash, the Yazama towers, the Yazama keeps, the Kataparato trebs, like all those in combination, like those in combination can just make pushing Japanese so obnoxious. On top of that, you save 200 wood throughout Dark Age and Feudal Age, just doing a regular boom. Can kickstart a nice boom. And your Monk Rush, I think, is definitely among the best in the game. I think definitely not on the same caliber as like Aztecs, Bohemians, or like Burmese, but I think maybe I'd say they're probably still in like the top 5 or so because of those wood savings and the fact that you get most all the technologies that are important in a Monk Rush. Just missing Heresy, which in a monk fight situation, in a monk like a smush situation, is really mostly only important if your opponent is also going to smush themselves. So otherwise, very, very nice smush potential. Those like the Japanese infantry, especially those halbs, I think can be very deadly to like a lot of cavalry civilizations. You have a really solid archery range, and like the samurai and like your champions, and in some cases the samurai can be so deadly versus like other infantry civilizations. Think like Slavs and Celts, Slavs and like late game, especially like early imp especially, they can just end up getting run over by Japanese, because even though they can certainly fight Japanese like late game when everything's upgraded, they don't get their infantry units like they don't get their infantry bonus intrinsically like Japanese do. They can just end up getting completely overwhelmed there. Same thing with Celts. They have a very heavy focus on infantry in the late game. Their Woad Raiders and like their halbs and stuff. Like all of that dies to like these faster attacking Japanese champions and like the samurai as well. So they can really struggle there. So yeah, I'd say Japanese a little bit polarizing, but like I think their worst matchups I think might be against like the superpower like archer civs like Britons, Vietnamese, possibly Ethiopians and Italians in there as well. But then they also have those very good matchups against like most other infantry civilizations and like a lot of cavalry civilizations as well. So I think B tier might be a nice place to put them. I talked about Slavs, talking about Japanese, so there we go. Slavs, solid eco, amazing late game, great monks, but you're just really slow in early Imperial Age. Again, similar issue to like Teutons, but at least Teutons I think are a lot better suited defensively. If you're getting pushed by like bombard cannons or something, you can get crenellations, maybe with some market abuse, and be able to hold the line. Slavs don't have anything like that, and so they're going to have a lot harder time defending at that point in the game until their late game can come online. And by that point, it might already be too late. And like civs that can push like Arbalest, BBC, I think are especially going to give Slavs a hard time. But then again, Slavs can I think match up pretty well against, again, most cavalry civs. Against a lot of infantry civilizations that might not be like Japanese, or like other civilizations that maybe don't get their infantry combat bonuses intrinsically. I think they can do pretty well because of Druzhina that can make their infantry just so difficult to deal with in the late game. But yeah, just being slow at that point, at that early Imperial Age stage of the game, I think is definitely what's hurting Slavs and what's keeping me from putting them any higher than B tier. Bulgarians, I think, is next. Very similar conceptually to Slavs. They even speak a very similar language in game. So with like the infantry siege focus, I think Bulgarians might have a bit of an easier time getting to that, because even though their eco isn't as good as Slavs, I think the fact that their blacksmith and their siege workshop techs are just so cheap, I think definitely helps them out in that regard. So they can get that army up and running faster, although in the long run, I think Slavs are going to have like the better quality, kind of like how like an infantry siege army. Bulgarians, I think, are just going to be able to get to that faster, even though the quality of that army composition, I don't think will be as good. I still think, and can't forget stirrups, cavaliers and hussars and conics. All those can be pretty tough to deal with for some civs, for a lot of different civs. But again, they're pretty expensive. Conics especially, I think, are pretty expensive. And without like a real eco bonus kind of helping out, you can be feeling it a little bit with Bulgarians, like a little bit slower out of the gate. And again, just like with Slavs, I think early Imperial Age powerhouses I think might be giving Bulgarians here a little bit of trouble. But still, I mean, with those faster working blacksmiths, like being able to make those tech switches faster, I think you can still definitely make it work. Celts coming in next. Another infantry siege civ, so that's certainly a composition I liked playing with. But I think Celts, again, they also have that early Imperial Age weakness, and I think even more so than like Slavs, because even though Celts also have a solid eco with like the faster working lumberjacks, I don't think in terms of like booming it might be quite as good as like the faster farm rate for Slavs. Don't quote me on that though, I think that's just how it feels to me. Just saying how it feels to me. And you're basically a sitting duck in early Imperial Age because you have like nothing to buy you time with. Your archery range is bottom tier. Your stable is below average, probably bordering on bottom tier as well. So because you're just missing so many technologies. So you're very all in on the infantry and you're very all in on the siege. And both of those things, especially those Woad Raiders, they're unique castles for those. The upgrade is really expensive. Thankfully, they do train quickly, so at least that's a saving grace for you there when you're trying to go for them. But still, like, you're a sitting duck in early Imperial Age for the most part. And so, like, again, just those early Imperial Age powerhouse civilizations, if they push Celts hard, I feel like I just feel like Celts, they're going to really struggle hard to defend against that. So I think B tier is a fair place to put them, because if you can survive and get to the late game, like they can be pretty difficult to stop. But of course, not impossible. Like I think with some units like good gunpowder, like bombard cannons, or even like just better pound for pound infantry, like for example that Burmese can bring to the table, Japanese can bring to the table, Teutons up in S tier can bring to the table, Aztecs in A tier can bring to the table. I think Celts can absolutely still be destroyed in late game. Just depends on the civ they're matched up against. Spanish is the penultimate B tier civ. Conquistadors, I think, can still make for a reasonable push. Even though everyone says that they're weak and they're just not worth going for, and they're just not worth going for, and it's really risky to use them. It didn't feel like to me, like especially watching like MOA 6, where I'm thinking of sets like for example Doubt versus Derp, and like Derp ended up Doubt was able to just completely win out against him, even though he had the civ advantage with Britons. I guess maybe there's like a bit of a skill gap in there as well, but yeah, I think it's just a matter of how they're used. On top of that, they have very good monks. You can do a smush with them. It's not going to be the most like amazing smush timing wise, but further and further you go along in the smush, when you get that castle up and you get Inquisition, those monks can be they get increasingly more difficult to stop. Even more important for you to be grabbing things like Heresy or Faith to deal with that instead. Late game, very diverse. Very diverse. You have fully upgraded infantry. You have paladins, siege rams, bombard cannons, bombard towers. Nothing really top tier, but I think just with all the options that you have, plus the potential to be somewhat aggressive, I think Spanish are definitely good enough to still be in B tier. Even though I know a lot of top tier arena players probably would not agree with me placing them there. But I personally still think they're good enough to be that high. Final civ is going to be Khmer. Amazing eco, but not really the greatest of late game options. You do have like your beefed up Scorpions, which I think can be difficult for some civs to deal with, but I think like civs that specialize in like the Halb Siege, I think can still end up completely steamrolling Khmer. So I think it's a little bit of a feast or famine civ. But again, I mean, Khmer I think were played a lot in MOA 6, and at least on Clan Arena, I think they proved to be pretty good. But I think in like a more vanilla, like generic, more farther rush distance arena, I think Khmer are definitely considerably worse, because you'd have to travel a lot further in order to be able to push your opponent, and by that point, if you're pushing with like Arbalest or like Scorpions or something, I think you just give your opponent more time to be able to get like a counter army up and running. So I think Khmer are going to have a lot harder time there. C tier civs that are kind of big meh. they might have like one or a couple of moments in the game where they're decent, but then afterwards, they really don't have anything going for them. Malayans is definitely going to be in there. So they have a decent boom, as well as like I think a decent early Imperial Age, especially with that faster working university, a potential for like Farimba, for like their Lycav Cavalier camels, the faster working university for chemistry to get bomber cannons out and hand cannoneers out. In fact, I think there might be one of the better civs for doing like some kind of like a 2TC fast stimp into like chemistry for like hand cannoneer bomber cannon rush. Just because of all those things working for them. Their smush, I think, is also very good. A little bit less so now because their free gold mining tech was passed over to Bohemians and also given in the form of a better bonus. But still, I think Malayan smush, I think, still is reasonable. It's just you're lacking power in late game, and you're missing siege engineers for your siege, missing halberdier, missing paladin and azar, missing bracer for your skirms and arbalests. Yeah, there's just a lot of holes in the Malayan's tech tree, and I think I can't really justify putting them any higher than C tier as a result. Persians up next. I'd say somewhat similar to Malayans in their strengths, like the solid eco. You can go for like a 2TC, like a hand cannoneer bomber cannon play. Yeah, I think you have some, better unit options overall. I think Malayans, you have like the trash bows, you have the paladins, the situation calls for it. You have siege rams, which Malayans don't get. So you have some more redeeming qualities over Malayans, but I still think overall, I think the reason why I maybe put them lower is just, I don't know. I feel like the points in the game where Malayans are stronger, I think they have maybe a few more points in the game where they're stronger. Like again, like that early, like late castle, early Imperial Age point in the game. I think Malayans definitely have an edge over Persians there, and I think I just consider that such an important part of the game that I think like with Persians kind of lagging behind a little bit at that point in the game compared to Malayans, I think that's where I'm gonna put them below. Even though I do believe their late game is better, but in any case, like watch out for like the Halp siege civs as usual. I think Persians will definitely be struggling against those civilizations more than most. Not hopeless to deal with them, of course, but I still think they will definitely struggle. Indians is next. Again, struggling against those like Halp siege compositions, I think. Your eco's nice with those cheaper villagers, so you can boom a lot easier. Maybe alongside, maybe you're taking map control. Monks are okay. Elephant archers, even though it's kind of like a meme unit in a lot of people's minds, they can definitely find some use against like archer civilizations, or just if you have the time to like be able to transition into them, they can make for a nice kind of a late game kind of power unit. But overall, I just don't feel like Indians have a whole lot going for them. And as far as like they have some decent like power units, but I think overall, I feel like you'd find better use for like their best units on like open maps compared to like closed maps. I think it's fair to say. Next up is Cumans. Used to be a very good arena civ, especially like the early to middle days of DE, but nowadays I think Cumans are just very easy to stop. Even if they do get away with the 2TC feudal boom, I think people, especially towards the top, I think know how to like fight them. Cumans, their two strengths are their like fast imperial potential off the back of their 2TC boom, as well as the map control that they can get with it. And so like, for example, if you can deny their map control, like you go like 2-3 range skirm, maybe like a siege workshop for like a mangonel or two, just stop them from getting that forward castle. Like half of Cuman's strength is basically gone right there. And they get to the late game again, Halb siege just completely destroys them. Like they don't get siege engineers for their own siege. They don't get bombard cannons. They don't have, their monks are terrible. So yeah, you're either, say maybe your slimmest chance might be if you have the Kipchak micro of the gods. But even then, even the best micro players will end up losing a lot of units once like the counter units are massed up enough, like the siege is massed up enough. There's only so much you can do. So I think in late game, Cumans I think are just absolute. They border on being garbage. So that one saving grace is that map control potential and that fast stint potential, but it's like you're on a very tight clock. If you can't make it happen, then Cumans essentially die to like so many different civilizations in the game. Magyars up next. Again, similar to Cumans in the sense that they have that cav archer and like light cav that cavalry and that cav archer focus, just a bit of course, bit differently. Your map control abilities are, let's say, above average, but at the same time, you don't have a real eco bonus. So while their late game is pretty damn good with the Magyars are heavy CA combo, I think that's one of the absolute best 2-unit combos in the game. I still think it's tricky to get to that just because of the nature of Magyars not having any eco bonus. But still, with that nice map control potential, and the fact that even though you're a cav and cav archer based civ, you can still fight like the Halb siege based army compositions better than most civilizations that have that theme because of the Magyar Tsar's ability to just completely nuke siege. So again, your opponent needs to be extra diligent with his defensive Halb micro, making sure he always has his Halbs nearby. Otherwise, they're caught out of position even slightly, all the siege just disappears, and they're going to have a very bad day against Magyars. Chinese is next. Chinese, solid enough eco. Early Imperial Age is decent, but again, you're missing the good monks, you're missing the bombard cannons, and of course you kind of have a bit of an archer focus as well, whether it's Arbalest or your Chukonu unique unit, and as a result, you can die very hard to like the onagers and siege onagers, especially if they have siege engineers, because in that situation, the Chinese can't just simply trade off their own onagers to deal with that very easily, because of the range advantage those siege units will have over the Chinese. And so yeah, Chinese are going to have a very difficult time with that. And they can maybe hold the line if they use like bombard towers, but still going Chukonu, which need castles, and going for a mass bombard tower, I think is you can't expect to get to that. I think in a 1v1 because there's only so much stone on the map. So overall, yeah, Chinese, I think they have a rightful place in C tier. Vikings up next. Similar to Chinese, where you have a really solid eco and like early Imperial Age, but afterwards, you don't really have a whole lot going for you. I think Vikings are even more magnified because, unlike Chinese, their cavalry is way worse. Your monks are even worse than Chinese. You also don't get bombard cannons. So yeah, if you can't close out the game in like early Imperial Age, which is I think these days, especially like just like an Arb and like a Ram or like Arb Treb sorts of civilizations, I think it's just harder and harder and harder to do in today's arena meta. I think Vikings, have simultaneously fallen off with that kind of shift in meta as well. So I think really the only thing that's keeping them from being like D tier is the fact that their eco is so strong. But it's like just the issue of like you have a really strong eco, but not a whole hell of a lot you can translate into that's really good for arena, in my opinion. Mongols is next, third to last civ. That's going to be in C tier. Strong late game, decent early Imperial Age. Strong late game. Obviously, Mangadayan Siege with Hazar can be very hard to stop. Okay-ish kind of like early economy with the faster hunters and allowing you to get more of the other resources. Decent map control potential with the beefed up light cav, but you are extremely weak in early Imperial Age. In fact, The only other civilization I think is weaker in early Imperial Age than Mongols, I think, is Celts up in B tier. Because at least Mongols have like a half-decent archer line and stuff that they can maybe fall back on, whereas Celts don't really have anything that can really buy them time. So Mongols are, again, similar to Celts. They're just almost complete sitting ducks in early Imperial Age. And if you're just you're sitting back trying to get Mangudai out, you're just gonna you're gonna lose your castles to almost certainly to like just faster civilizations. And at that point, Mongols are like basically nothing as a civilization. Although there are some players, especially like top arena players, who definitely shun the Mangudai play, maybe because they know it's just going to be too difficult to get up and running, and they just opt for other units, like, for example, Running, who I think is probably like at least a top 5 arena player nowadays. Maybe alongside guys like my top 5, I'd say, is like, in no particular, like Viper, Tato, Maudry, Draken, and Running. I think so like Running definitely is like a very anti-Mangudai kind of Mongols player. He'll go for like the heavy CA, so that's going to be quite a bit nicer on the eco because you don't have to gather so much stone and simultaneously balance your eco in such a way that you're trying to get Mangudai out and upgraded at the same time. But still, I mean, even so, you don't really have a solid eco bonus. So even going for something like heavy CA, I think you're definitely going to be struggling a bit compared to, you're going to be struggling a bit versus those fast early imp civs, but still a better option to go for if you're facing them. Tatars, penultimate C tier civ. Again, once again, one of those cavalry and CA kind of base civilizations. So by nature, I think not as good in like a arena and like these closed maps, but still, I mean, your late game, I think, all things considered, with like the beefed up heavy CA, you have the Keshiks, which are very cost efficient heavy cavalry, medium cavalry to like heavy cavalry unique units, and you also get bombard towers that can be nice for pushing or just holding territory. So I think Tatars also like a decent like early economy with like the extra like the longer lasting sheep and the extra sheep that you get when you build town centers. But yeah, I think it's safe to say Tatars just don't have the greatest units that they can go for on arena. They're not bad, but they're certainly not very good either, I think, at least in my opinion. Huns is my last civ in C tier. Again, that cavalry and cav archer focus. I think comparing that to like Tatars, I think they might be a little bit better with regards to the aggression. Like if you're trying to do something with like cav archers and siege, I think they might be a little bit better than Tatars. And also I think there might be a bit better for map control overall. But I think they're not as good in like early Imperial Age because Tatars especially can get that cav archer mass like out and upgraded a lot faster than Huns because they save so many resources from getting free thumb ring and Parthian tactics. Like it's not uncommon, and I've done this before, for Tatars to get like at least like anywhere between 20 and 30 heavy cav archers that are like almost fully upgraded, like minus their unique technology that gives them extra armor. You can just get those numbers and those upgrades up at like 31, 32 minutes in-game time off the back of a 3 TC boom. Like I don't believe Huns can. I do not believe Huns can do that in like similar circumstances in like a similar economy, because they don't get those those technology, like the savings on those techs that Tatars do. And of course, in general, I think their late game is, I think, quite a bit worse. I think maybe the advantage they have over Tatars is the fact that they do get Paladin. Let's say like their heavy cav archers are pound for pound way worse, and I value more pop efficient units in post Imperial Age, the more cost efficient units, like the cheaper cav archers that Huns get access to. So yeah, I don't think they're quite as good in like that stage of the game. But still, like reasonably, like you can, I'd say probably the one thing Huns have going for them is like their somewhat aggressive potential. That might be their only hope, and yeah, if especially they're facing a civ that's like that just beats them in late game. So D tier, just the civs that I don't feel really have much if anything going for them on arena. So Berbers is going to be at the top. There's just 3 civs here. What's saving what's making Berbers, I think, better than the other two civilizations here, I have Goths and Mayans, is the fact that they do at least have, I think, they do at least have like a solid late game. Like have bombard cannons, they have siege engineers, camel archers en masse can be tough to stop, especially if they have like a screen of the cheap Berber hussars or possibly even camels out on the field at the same time. So yeah, at least in the late game, I think Berbers are definitely better. They can match up a lot better than Goths and Mayans against a lot of different civs. But again, yeah, you're lacking much of any eco bonus, and you got to watch out for like especially those halb ram pushes in early Imperial Age, because that's just traditionally Berber's weakness. A little bit less so, I'd say, on like closed maps like Arena, because you're not spending down like half your gold by the time you get to Imperial Age, like you might be on like a more open map. But I mean, at least you're not spending off all that gold, so it's a lot easier to make that kind of tech switch for like maybe to counter something like Halbrand, maybe like Champion Line. But still, I mean, still something I'd say Berbers need to watch out for. You got to get over that early Imperial Age hurdle with Berbers, and that's just not easy to do, especially with that lack of an eco bonus. So I think D tier, I think, is a fair place to put them. Mayans is second. Mayans, how far again, a civ that's fallen from grace. Between like 4 to like 6 years ago, the Mayans were like all the craze on Arena, maybe alongside Aztecs, because low eco YOLO kind of with plumes and like trebs and stuff up to like fast Imperial Age was like all the craze. But really that really just does not work in today's Arena meta. At least 9 times out of 10, I would say it's gonna fail. Plumes, on top of being more expensive than they have ever been before, they've also, the Mayans eco bonus has really been cut down to size, and yeah, it's just overall nowhere near as strong of a strategy as it used to be, both on the technical side of things because of Mayans getting nerfs, and on the more physical side of things, where the Arena meta has shifted, and people have just know how to deal with them. And if Mayans don't have that early Imperial Age kind of like snowball like kind of thing going for them, then they just don't have anything going for them after that, especially because their late game borders on garbage. It's just kind of cost efficient, because just kind of cost efficient and like nothing else. I think I just value pop efficiency again a lot more than cost efficiency late game, and Mayans, I think, will have a really tough time fighting like those like champion and like siege army compositions, especially. Yeah, unless you have like the Eagle micro of the gods and they're like fully upgraded with like El Dorado, you're gonna have a really tough time clearing those compositions. And even if you do have it, like, I think it's overall not gonna be cost efficient in the slightest. I think for every like one siege unit, like onager, siege onager you snipe, you're probably gonna lose like 4 or 5 eagles in like a typical suicide eagle charge. And so even though you might take them out, I don't think it's gonna be very cost efficient for you in the long run. And of course, no surprise, Goths last. Yeah, Goths. One trick pony, infantry civ. There's just so many different civilizations in the game that can just deal with that so easily. And even some civs that might struggle with it, like maybe more cav-based civs, like a lot of them even have access to like hand cannon or bomber cannon. So if they do like a lower eco into like imp with like chemistry and they push it like hand cannon or bomber cannon, I still think Goths can absolutely still die in that situation. Yeah, terrible monks, a pretty meh late game. Especially because like infantry is not very pop efficient, and the fact that you have like basically 0 eco bonus, yeah, pretty much 0 eco bonus, like instantly research loom is not an eco bonus on Arena, not in the slightest. So yeah, you just have really nothing going for you as Goths. course, the caveat is always the fact that Goths are so polarizing that they can have very good and very bad matchups. But I think, yeah, that's really about all positive I can say. Yeah, Goths overall, yeah. Just don't draft them, guys, I'd say. Just don't. I would never draft them, and I know tons of people who just would never draft them for like a serious arena event. Like, I would not do it in a million years, at least not with the way that Goths are right now. Just a very heavy infantry focus with like no eco bonus, and like, yeah. And that's very unlikely to ever get changed because that's just Goth's identity, and that's just been the identity that they've had for like the past 20 some odd years. So, last in D tier they are. So there we go. All of the, what is that, 39 civilizations now listed. So, like I said, if balance changes come, like I think it might be on the horizon for the civilizations, then I'll definitely be revisiting this and kind of updating the tier list accordingly. But this is just my ordering of the civs right now. And feel free to agree or disagree. Lately, arena balance, like I said, it's overall pretty good to the point where I think there's like maybe a one tier difference between civilizations at most for most of them. So if you feel like maybe I placed a civ too high or too low, then chances are it might be just one or like just one tier lower in your guys' for you guys, and so therefore it's like overall it's like treat most of these civilizations as being like one or plus or minus like one tier. And I think you should be. I think that should be good to go. So with that said, thank you guys for watching. This going through commentary for 39 civs is definitely taking a lot out of me, but thankfully I got through it. Hopefully it was insightful, and I hope you guys enjoyed.